On March 6, 2025, British Columbia Premier David Eby stunned both nations by announcing plans to impose tolls on American commercial trucks using the Alaska Highway. The announcement sent shockwaves through political and business circles on both sides of the border, as few had anticipated such a bold move from a provincial leader. This was no routine infrastructure move, it was a direct response to President Trump's threat of a 25% tariff on Canadian goods. The proposed tolls were designed to hit back at the heart of American supply lines, making it clear that Canada would not stand by quietly in the face of economic aggression. The Alaska Highway, once a symbol of cooperation, was now a bargaining chip in a high-stakes economic standoff. For over 80 years, this road has connected Alaska to the rest of the United States, winding through the vast wilderness of Canada and serving as a lifeline for communities and industries alike. For decades, Alaska's supply chain has depended on this route through Canada, carrying everything from produce to oilfield equipment. The highway is more than just a road, it's a vital artery for commerce, livelihoods, and even emergency supplies during harsh winters. The idea of tolling this essential artery was unprecedented, signaling a fundamental shift in cross-border relations. It raised immediate questions about the future of trade, travel, and cooperation between the two countries. Premier Eby made it clear, if the U.S. targets Canada's economy, BC will hit back where it hurts. His message was resolute, underscoring a new willingness to use regional leverage in international disputes. The reaction was immediate: shock in Washington, concern in Alaska, and a sense of resolve in Canada. American trucking companies scrambled to assess the impact while Canadian officials rallied behind their premier. President Trump fired back, promising retaliation. He called the tolls an unfriendly act and warned of further measures, escalating tensions even further. Suddenly, a quiet highway became the front line of a looming trade war. What was once a remote stretch of road now stood at the center of an international dispute, watched by millions. The world watched as a single province's decision threatened to ignite a much larger conflict. News outlets from Tokyo to London covered the story, speculating on the global economic fallout. The message was unmistakable: economic threats would be met with economic force. Both sides now faced a test of resolve, with businesses and workers caught in the crossfire. The stage was set for escalation, as the world braced for what could become the most significant trade standoff between Canada and the United States in a generation. In Victoria, BC's government moved fast, determined to show both resolve and creativity in the face of mounting trade tensions. Within days they introduced the Economic Stabilization Tariff Response Act, a piece of legislation crafted with urgency and precision, designed to send a clear message across the border. Deputy Premier Nikki Sharma stood before the press, her voice unwavering as she declared, "We did not ask for this trade war, but we will fight for BC's economy." Her words echoed the frustration and determination felt throughout the province. The act didn't impose tolls immediately. It gave the cabinet the power to do so at any moment, a loaded gun on the table, ready to be used if negotiations failed. The law specifically targeted commercial traffic to and from Alaska, a vital economic artery, with a sunset clause to emphasize its temporary retaliatory nature, and to reassure both businesses and the public that this was not a permanent measure. For the first time, a Canadian province was asserting its own leverage in a trade dispute, acting independently of Ottawa, and stepping onto the international stage with a bold new approach. The strategy was clear: inflict economic pain on Alaska, hoping to turn its residents and businesses into lobbyists against Trump's tariffs, and force Washington to reconsider its stance. No tolls had been collected yet, but the threat was real and ready, hanging over the border like a storm cloud. The act was a bold gamble. Would the pain in Alaska be enough to sway Washington, or would it escalate the conflict even further? For now, the legislation was a warning shot, not an active policy, but its very existence changed the tone of negotiations. BC had drawn its line in the sand, signaling it would not be pushed around in the high-stakes world of international trade. The world watched closely, waiting to see if President Trump would cross it, and how far BC was willing to go to defend its interests. Provincial assertiveness had entered the international arena, setting a precedent for how Canadian provinces could respond to global challenges. The stakes had never been higher, and the outcome would shape the future of cross-border relations for years to come. President Trump's response was swift and dramatic, sending shockwaves through both Washington and Ottawa. The world watched as he took to the podium, his words echoing across news channels and social media feeds. He called BC's toll plan an act of aggression, vowing the US would not be held hostage by a Canadian province. The message was clear: any move against American interests would be met with forceful retaliation. Though he delayed the 25% tariff for a month, he made it clear his patience was running out. The threat loomed over every truck crossing the border, casting uncertainty on businesses and workers on both sides. Behind the scenes, talk of extreme measures, even annexation, surfaced, fueling fears of a sovereignty crisis. Rumors swirled in political circles, and the media speculated about just how far the standoff could go. Premier Eby seized on this, accusing Trump of wanting to make BC the 51st state. His words rallied supporters at home, but also deepened the rift between the two governments. The dispute was no longer just about trade, it was about national identity. For many Canadians, the border became a symbol of pride and independence, not just a line on a map. Trump painted Canada as an ungrateful neighbor, ignoring decades of partnership. He questioned the value of old alliances, suggesting that loyalty was a thing of the past. The threat of tariffs became a ticking clock, with Trump daring Canada to blink first. Every passing day brought new headlines, new speculation, and mounting anxiety for those whose livelihoods depended on cross-border trade. By framing BC's move as an attack, he justified his own escalation. Protests erupted at the border and officials scrambled to manage the growing crisis. The world watched as the deadline approached. News crews from around the globe descended on the border, capturing every tense moment. Would either side back down, or was a full-scale trade war inevitable? The uncertainty was palpable, with both leaders refusing to show weakness. The rhetoric was hotter than ever, with accusations and threats traded almost daily. The stakes, higher than anyone imagined, left the world holding its breath. As the sun set over the border, the fate of two nations hung in the balance. For Alaskans, BC's toll threat was personal. Alaska relies on the land route through Canada for fresh food and urgent supplies, goods that can't wait for slow sea shipments. The Alaska Trucking Association warned that tolls would drive up costs for everything from groceries to oil field parts. Governor Mike Dunleavy urged calm, hoping for federal intervention, but Alaskans felt trapped between two governments. The land route's speed and flexibility are irreplaceable. Delays could mean empty shelves and stalled industries. The threat of tolls made the abstract trade war painfully real for families and businesses. Alaska's leaders scrambled for solutions, but options were limited. The state's economic stability hung in the balance. The highway had become a lifeline under siege. Alaska struck back where it hurt BC most: cruise tourism. Senator Dan Sullivan threatened to waive the Passenger Vessel Services Act, allowing cruise ships to bypass Canadian ports entirely. Nearly 2 million cruise passengers pass through BC each year, fueling local economies. If U.S. law changed, ships could sail straight from Seattle to Alaska, devastating BC's port cities. The threat was credible. Congress had done it before during the pandemic. Sullivan's message: if BC tolls our trucks, we'll sink your tourism. The standoff now included not just highways but the massive cruise industry. Thousands of Canadian jobs were suddenly at risk. The economic stakes for both sides soared. The question: would either side risk such damage to make a point? The game of economic hardball had escalated. The cruise ship gambit raised the pressure on BC. The conflict was no longer just about trade, it was about livelihoods. The next move could be catastrophic. BC wasn't alone. Canada rallied in a rare show of unity. Prime Minister Trudeau called Trump's tariffs a very dumb thing to do, promising federal retaliation. Ontario Premier Doug Ford announced a 25% surcharge on electricity exports to the U.S., targeting states dependent on Canadian power. Yukon's Premier banned U.S. liquor and restricted American firms from government contracts, even floating a ban on Donald Trump Jr.'s hunting trips. BC halted alcohol sales from Republican-led states. The Team Canada approach was clear: retaliate broadly, target American interests, and show a united front. The message to Washington, Canada, would not be bullied. Retaliation would be national, not just provincial. The economic pain would be felt across the border. The trade dispute had become a continental standoff. For Alaskan families, the impact was immediate. Higher grocery bills, squeezed budgets, and tough choices. Small businesses faced delays and uncertainty. threatening jobs and livelihoods. On the Canadian side, the threat to cruise tourism meant thousands could lose their seasonal work. The disappearance of cruise passengers would devastate port cities like Victoria and Vancouver. The dispute also frayed cross-border ties. Shared events, shopping trips, and family visits were at risk. What was once a friendly border now felt like a dividing line. Everyday life was disrupted for communities that once saw themselves as neighbors. The human cost of the trade war was mounting. Economic threats had become personal realities. The trade dispute sent shockwaves through North America's economy. Businesses on both sides faced paralyzing uncertainty. Expansion plans stalled, hiring froze, and investment dried up. Tourism suffered as travelers reconsidered cross-border trips, hurting hotels, restaurants, and attractions. Deeply integrated supply chains, especially in manufacturing, were threatened by tariffs and delays. Ontario's electricity surcharge risked raising costs for U.S. factories, making American goods less competitive. Every point of connection, highways, ports, power lines, became a potential weapon. Trust between the two countries eroded, making future cooperation harder. The conflict exposed the dangers of weaponizing economic dependencies. The ripple effects were strategic, not just financial. The foundation of the North American partnership was at risk. As September 2025 arrived, the US and Canada faced a stark choice: escalate or negotiate. One path led to a full-blown trade war: tariffs, tolls, shuttered businesses, and lasting damage. The other required leaders to step back, seek compromise, and prioritize stability over politics. Quiet diplomacy offered hope. The US could drop tariffs. Canada could shelve its countermeasures. The window for talks was open, but closing fast. The challenge: overcome political pride and find common ground. Millions of livelihoods and the world's longest undefended border hung in the balance. The next move would shape the continent's future. The stakes had never been higher.